Good morning.
Are you hearing me well?
I can hear you well. I see I am not in the list of interpreters. Do you need to assign me to a booth?
I'm checking it. Okay. Give me a second. So you're Jennifer, right?
No, I am Estela, and
Estela?
I am in the Spanish English booth with Esperanza.
Okay, so I think you logged in with different email ID.
With Mac.com.
But I think I can do that.
I had a hard time getting in because it asked me to sign up, and I
Yeah.
tried the Mac and I tried both Gmail, and it was not registered. So I entered with the Gmail. I thought that might have
So
been.
it's okay. The email ID is the same, but just Gmail.
It's Zaffaroni Estela, first name, last name, and first name. Zaffaroni Estela at gmail.com.
Can you please chat me because I don't see you?
Okay. Where chat? Let me find the chat here. I'm not used
Yeah.
to that. Here, show chat. And I'm gonna write here what my email is.
Yeah, and then only to me, please.
Only to you. Okay, Stella. Wait, at gmail.com. And how do I find how to send it only to you?
So I'm seeing Esperanza and then Jennifer and then Qatar and that's only three, and then I just wanted to have
It's
more.
Jin Yuan to Jin. Okay, to you. And I'm sending the email. Wait. Okay, there it goes. Did you get it? My email?
Okay. Yep, I got it.
Prédécesseur Joe Biden, notamment en matière économique. As you know, we inherited, comme vous savez, la précédente année.
So I made you interpreter. Hello, Sophie.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yep, I'm hearing you.
Because it says it's connecting. You cannot add any interpreters now. They need to, you cannot do it manually.
Oh, I can do it. I just
Okay.
did. Yeah.
Okay.
So we have Esperanza and then Zaffaroni and then Jennifer and then Qatar.
So they're all connected?
Mhm.
Okay. I would like to conduct a quick test. I'm going to I don't know what it, Jing-Yun, can you pause the recording? Because I see it's already an hour and 19 minutes. Is that it? If you can put.
We would encourage everyone to observe so that we have a smooth flow and communication between speakers and participants. And by the way, by way of introduction, I should have started with this. My name is Farai Magziwa, and I take the readiness program at the Adaptation Fund. So just to note that we are going to be recording this webinar, and we'll share the recording with participants afterwards. If you're not speaking, please mute your microphone so we don't have background interference. And of course, please feel free to turn on your video. It would be great to see the faces of participants and to see your faces as we interact. During the presentations and discussions, if you wish to contribute or take the floor, please click the hand icon on the WebEx platform, and we will give you the floor. Alternatively, you can type your comment, question in the chat box, and we will respond to those comments as well. And also please note that we do have interpretation services available as part of this webinar. We have interpretation for French and Spanish, and you can click on the little globe icon and select the language of your preference. And also please feel free to interact in that language as well, either English, French, or Spanish. So the agenda for today, we have the head of the Secretariat with us, Mr. Miko Olikainen, and he will kick us off with some welcome remarks. We will discuss briefly the role of the designated authority to the Adaptation Fund, and then we'll get into the details of the title of the webinar to explain the decision by the board that gives effect to this transition of the designated authority. And we also want to get some feedback from you. So we will run a very brief poll to get some information back from you as current designated authorities and possibly potential future designated authorities in terms of your needs, gaps, and how you view interaction and engagement with the Adaptation Fund. And we will conclude at the top of the hour with a general discussion, some comments, feedback, and any other issues that you wish to discuss. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Miko Olikainen for the welcome remark. Thank you.
Thank you, Farai. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the webinar on my behalf as well. It's very good to connect with all of you early in the year. This year is very likely to be, again, the hottest year on record. We know that there will be disasters hitting vulnerable communities. We don't know where, we don't know when, but we know that the planet faces increasing need to adapt. We know that the adaptation finance is inadequate. The most latest report on this is the UNEP gap report that was released in November. And we know that adaptation finance would need to be multiple times higher than it is at the moment. The countries have made decisions to double adaptation finance in 2021 by the end of this year. And now in Baku in November, parties again decided to raise finance from the previous 100 billion per year goal to 300 billion per year by 2035 at the latest, which represents tripling of the previous goal. Also, the climate funds, like the Adaptation Fund, was given a mandate to triple its outflows by 2030. So we have a clear task ahead of us to increase the amount, but also the effectiveness and the efficiency of the support that we as a climate fund provide to developing countries. There are many challenges to mobilize those resources. We are currently in a in a difficult geopolitical and macroeconomic situation, but we need to do our best. And of course, to do that in a way that aligns with the priorities of countries. This gives a segue because revising our arrangement with country focal points with our designated authorities is part of that attempt to support countries more effectively. The Adaptation Fund Board decided at its meeting last October to revise its system of country focal points. This will replace the previous system that was based on single individuals, single officers from countries being the focal points, with a more whole of entity based system. In the new system, the designated authorities will be organizations, and within those organizations, then focal points appointed. The designated authorities are crucial contact points and entry points for countries to access the Adaptation Fund. They're also important focal points for the implementing partners and other stakeholders. The main two roles of the designated authorities is, first of all, is to endorse any projects that the Adaptation Fund is funding in the country. This includes both at the project proposal stage, when the proposal comes in, it needs to be endorsed by the designated authority, but throughout the project implementation as well, the designated authority needs to continue to support that project. And if the project should not be in line with the country's priorities anymore, the designated authorities have a role to state so as well. The Adaptation Fund has been the first climate fund that made direct access to its resources available for developing countries. This is important in building countries' capacities to address adaptation, enabling countries to have currently up to 2 national implementing entities that are based in the country and have the capacity and capabilities to identify and develop adaptation projects with the Adaptation Fund. The change with the designated authorities is aimed at fostering continuity, fostering teamwork and institutional knowledge that enhances access to the Adaptation Fund resources. Over the next year, the aim is to invite eligible developing country governments to nominate a government entity to be the designated authority and to include primary and secondary contact points within that entity. The key aim here is to avoid losing any institutional knowledge if one person should leave their position or leave the government, by applying a more team-oriented approach instead of the previous approach that was very much based on the individual. The designated authorities of each country are pivotal in the fund's country-led approach to projects and programs. And of course, those projects and programs need to be aligned with the country's national adaptation priorities and targeted to the most climate vulnerable communities. So the designated authority has a key role in ensuring that the funding that the Adaptation Fund provides is really aligned with those priorities. And if there are any misalignment between the support by the Adaptation Fund and Adaptation Fund support and the country's priorities, the designated authorities then play a key role in communicating that to us and working with the fund to ensure alignment again. So with this, I'd like to thank you very much for joining, and without further ado, I will hand over back to Farai. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikko, for those remarks and words. While we have him here with us, are there any, or is there any question to Mikko? Perhaps that's maybe high level regarding the high-level overview of how the Adaptation Fund works, or regarding direct access that he has mentioned. And perhaps Ishani, Jinyang, if you can help me out here, because I don't see any, I'm not connected online, so you can let me know if there are any icons or any comments in the chat.
So far, no hands have been raised for it.
I don't have any received chat.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much again, Miko. With that, maybe we move on to the role of the DA. I think Miko has already touched upon the function and role of the DA for the Adaptation Fund. But Ishani Devnath is going to maybe provide a little more detail in context of that role. So Ishani, over to you. And I think we'll stop sharing from here.
Thank you, Farai. Let me just share my screen.
Right.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining this important webinar. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ishani Devnath, and I work for the readiness team under the Countries and Partnerships Unit of the Fund. So I'll straight away jump into this presentation. So what is essentially a designated authority? A DA is an entity who acts as a point of contact for the Adaptation Fund and appoints a primary contact who is responsible to sign on behalf of the designated authority. What that means is that a DA essentially is a governing entity who not only acts as a point of contact for the Adaptation Fund, but is also the caretaker of the country's engagement with the Adaptation Fund. They are responsible for understanding the adaptation priorities and interventions. And as a pre-accreditation step, they are responsible also to identify and nominate appropriate entities to apply for accreditation to the Adaptation Fund, and also to endorse the accreditation application for the nominated entities. All right. Now, the DA essentially has several roles and responsibilities, and let me start by the main functions, pre-accreditation. As I mentioned, the DA is responsible for nominating and selection of an entity within the country who will be responsible for implementing adaptation projects. Now, the way the nomination process works is that the DA establishes a selection committee and identifies any or all potential entities. Then they conduct a preliminary assessment and develop a shortlist of the most suitable candidates. They identify the gaps against fiduciary standards and evaluate any potential to bridge those gaps. And finally, they nominate the most appropriate entity and work with them to fulfill the gaps and complete the accreditation application. Now, during this process, the DA is also responsible for making sure that the selected entity is providing evidence of fiduciary competencies, that they're fit to take responsibility and accountability for the full climate change adaptation project cycle, and also that the selected entity is able to promote zero tolerance for fraud and corruption. Now, as a post-accreditation responsibility, the DA is responsible for endorsing the project proposals of the accredited entities. What this means is that they're responsible for making sure that the selected entity are able to appropriate processes and management for implementing adaptation projects, and also have the commitment and capacity to comply with all the environmental and social policy and gender policies of the Adaptation Fund. The DA is also responsible for endorsing the letter for a regional implementing entity as its member country as well. So those are the main responsibilities of the designated authority, the functions of a designated authority. With that, I'll end my short presentation and I open the floor for any questions.
Thank you, Ishani. Are there any questions to Ishani in terms of the function and role of the designated authority? Any function or role that needs clarification or you have a comment on? You can click the hand icon if you wish to take the floor. I'm not seeing any hand icon raised from our end. Sophie, Jinyang, would you let us know if there's any comment in the chat?
Yes,
I don't see
Farai,
any chats.
so far, nothing.
Okay. So I gather that was a clear presentation and outline of the role and function of the designated authority. I think that,
Alors,
yes.
Go ahead, Mrs. Nyong. We have a
bonjour. Oui, bonjour tout le monde. Je suis Mme Fatigna, autorité désignée pour le Sénégal, pour l'adaptation. J'avais une petite question par rapport au rôle des différents, en tout cas, points de contact. Dans la nouvelle disposition, vous avez proposé, vous avez en tout cas, il y a 2 points de contact. Maintenant, comment est-ce que le travail de ces 2 points de contact va se passer? Est-ce que si l'un n'est pas disponible, que l'autre va assurer en tout cas ce rôle, ou bien parallèlement, vous changez avec tous les 2 points de contact? Merci.
Thank you for the question. So, however, Sophie, do you mind repeating the question for us in English? I think in this room we don't have the interpretation coming through. And then
Sure.
we'll have Ishani respond. Or Ishani, do you
Sure.
want to?
I can, if you want, Farai, I can repeat the question. I believe
Yeah,
the
please go
question
ahead.
I believe the question stated was, in my presentation, I had mentioned there are 2 points of contact or focal points within the DA entity. Are these 2 focal points supposed to work together, or are there different functions for each of the focal points or contact that are appointed within the designated authority? I believe I understood that question, and that is what it was stated. So let me start, and I know in the room we have both Sylvia and Nisa, so if I do miss out on anything, please do feel free to add any important points to it. So according to based on the recent board meeting we had, it has, and this is a presentation you will hear very soon from Rob as well, the DA designated authority now officially will be an entity instead of an individual. What that means is within the entity, you will have a primary focal point who will be the main person responsible for communicating and signing and officially endorsing all the letters on behalf of the NIE and the RIE for the adaptation fund. And there is also a second focal point who has been appointed, who will be working in conjunction and in together with the primary focal point. So there are not going to be 2 different responsibilities, but both the individuals and the focal point within the entity are going to be working together. Nisa and Sylvia, do you have any points you would like to add to that?
Merci, c'est bon. Merci beaucoup.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And I believe there's another comment in the chat box from Mohibullah, who is asking what RIE is. And I'm assuming you're referring to the full form of the acronym. RIE is a regional implementing entity of the Adaptation Fund.
Thank you, Ishani. And I think while we are here, actually the question on the contact points and how the new structure will work for the designated authority is going to be covered, I believe, by Rob in the presentation, which is going to come just now. But however, because the question of the regional implementing entity has been raised, could I perhaps ask, I see Young has posted a comment in the chat explaining that RIE is regional implementing entity. And sorry to put you on the spot, Young. Do you mind taking the floor and actually explaining the difference between a national implementing entity, a regional implementing entity, and a multilateral implementing entity for the benefit of the designated authorities who are connected on this call? Do you want to take the floor, Young, and just maybe give that distinction between the three types of accredited implementing entities for the fund? Young, I think you are muted.
Yes, can you hear me well? Sorry,
Yes,
I
now we
forgot.
can hear you.
mute.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Sure, thank you so much, Vari. So explain for those who are not familiar with the different types of implementing entities at the Adaptation Fund. So we do have 3 implementing entity types. So first one is multilateral implementing entity. These are intergovernmental organizations and international organizations, and their operations are usually worldwide. It includes also UN agencies and also multilateral development banks. And for here, accreditation team is here to be accredited. Multilateral implementing entities need to be invited by our board for accreditation. The second type is regional implementing entities. These are intergovernmental organizations with regional operations based, and national implementing entities are the national entities, legal entities, which were endorsed by the designated authority of the country, and they which went through accreditation, and those are the national implementing entities. And for accreditation, the designated authority has a role, as previous presentation explained, that for regional and national implementing entities, before starting the accreditation, an official endorsement letter from the DAs is a prerequisite. Hope that clarifies. Thank you.
Thank you, Young, for that clarification. Now, Rob, do you want to perhaps take the floor and kick off with your presentation? Because I think a lot of the issues you will cover will also give clarity to some of these questions that we're discussing at the moment. So whenever you're ready, Rob, please, you have the floor. And by way of introduction, Rob Kresh is our Senior Program Officer under the Adaptation Fund. So Rob, over to you.
Sure, thank you very much. I think I will share my screen to project a few slides. As Farai mentioned, I'm going to speak to the decision, the board decision that was made on this role. As he mentioned, my name is Rob Kresh, and I'm the team lead for governance and operations here. Let me figure out how to share my screen. And okay. Can everybody see my screen? Can everybody see the slides on my screen?
Not yet, Rob. We don't yet see them.
Not yet.
Right.
I think it's coming. We're seeing it.
Okay.
Great.
Now we
Okay.
see it. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so let me just walk you through the board decision that was made. A lot of the background was provided already in the opening and in the course of the discussion. But what you see on the screen is the text of the board decision where the board decided to change the definition of designated authority from an officer to an entity. The decision also included a 1-year transition period by which our operational policies and guidelines would have bridge language, and that we would phase out the current system of nominating a government officer as a DA at the end of the 12-month period that started at the point of the decision. The decision also asked us to invite designated or parties to nominate within the 12 months of the date of decision a government entity as the designated authority. And this might get to one of the questions that I saw in the chat about whether a primary focal point can nominate others. So the a government entity would be nominated as the designated authority, and a primary and secondary contact point from that entity would be also appointed with signing authority. The rest of the decision is not entirely material. We were asked to this conversation, we were asked to communicate the decision, but maybe more importantly, just to get to the actual approach, we have taken a few steps to implement this decision. So as of the point of the decision by the board, we're no longer accepting nominations of officers for the designated authority. All responses are requested by October 11th this year, which will be 1 year, 12 months from the date of the board's decision. As mentioned, countries are asked to provide a primary and a secondary contact point. And we've also, to facilitate this, have circulated to our partners a sample response letter just to help make as concrete as possible and also to support the application of the decision. A sample letter, which is you see on your screen here, which makes it clear that what's the name of the institution that's being nominated for designated authority, and who are the primary and the two secondary contact points as well. This is, let me just pause here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can go back and see some of the comments in the chat. But this would be this is the run through of the decision. I would welcome questions, and I'm looking at the ones in the chat at this moment, but also anyone who wants to raise their hand and make a comment or question would be welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I think the first question, which is related to this change and the transition, is there are two questions. So the first one is, what is the role of the designated sorry, let me start with the second one. It says, what will be the big difference between the focal point and now the designated authority? And then the next one regarding the role, perhaps if you want to take it on, or we have Nisa with us here as well. Maybe she might want to jump in there. So maybe, Rob, do you want to start with the first one? What is the big difference between the focal point and now the designated authority?
I actually will point you, I see Young has made some responses in the chat, so perhaps I could direct everybody's attention there. I think in regards to the difference, Young's reply is that the DA endorses the funding proposal on behalf of the country, and then the role of, and then in terms of the question about accessing adaptation fund directly without accrediting an NIE, Young has offered the answer that countries can access that funding through NIEs, REs, and MIEs. And so if it doesn't have an NIE, it can submit funding through one of the others. But perhaps others would like to come in.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Actually, if I may maybe direct this question to Nisa again, and Nisa, sorry for putting you on the spot. But regarding I think the question also has two elements to it. I think the first one you've already addressed in terms of the distinction between the designated authority and the implementing entities. But I think the other angle that question is asking is, what is the difference between the designated authority as an entity, which will have a primary focal point, and what is the distinction between that primary focal point and now in the decision we will have two contact points. So perhaps, Nisa, do you want to just provide clarification of how the designated authority as an institution will be expected to function, and that clarity of roles between primary and secondary contact points.
Thank you, Farai. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Regarding the change of DA from officer to entity, the sole point here to focus on is that the designated authority's functions are not changing with respect to adaptation fund. Whether it's an officer or entity, the work of the designated authority is to identify implementing entities and nominate them and endorse the projects based on their capabilities to the adaptation fund and be the contact point for adaptation fund. However, changing of officer to entity really just makes it more, it helps with the continuity. We've had scenarios where the designated authority, which is an officer, is transferred or changes the role, and that leads to discontinuity of the work that is going on with the adaptation fund.
Issue that we had was just getting, I know that this is all done.
Sorry, Yuri. Oh, okay, they've muted. Go ahead, Nisa.
So with the officer changing to entity, it's just keeping the institutional knowledge, the knowledge that the designated authority had with respect to the work going on with adaptation fund. It stays with the institution with the number of people. So there is no going around and figuring out where the designated authority was in terms of the work that was going on with adaptation fund. And in terms of primary contact, the primary contact point within the designated authority will assume now the functions, the key functions of signing. Signing of the endorsement letters would come from them. They will be the key point of contact for us to know what are the priorities, what are the adaptation priorities of the country so that they can communicate that with the fund and help with the direction of project designing. The contact point, one or two, the secondary contact is up to two. So it could be one or two. And their key function is to keep in touch with the adaptation fund on day-to-day basis, on coordination, where the project is at, where the implementing entities applications are. If there is any delays in the accreditation process, the adaptation fund secretariat will contact primary and secondary both. But we do expect that secondary contact points would be the key people who will be helping in the coordination and taking only the most important decisions to the primary contact point. I hope this is a little clear.
Yeah, thanks, Nisa. Thanks, Nisa. So in summary, the primary focal point is the signatory who will sign. Secondary contact point handles coordination. So there is a question in the chat, and related to that question, actually, Neranda, thanks for pointing it out as well. The question is, can we clarify if the designated authority, so who should sign the letter of designation of the entity that will be the designated authority? So related to this question, and I'll hand over to you, Nisa, again, there is, we acknowledge that we have already current designated authorities who are individuals, and these individuals are sitting in a government ministry or department. So I guess the question is, can those ministries nominate themselves to be now the entity that is the designated authority? Can that country have a different ministry that is going to be nominated as the new designated authority of the fund? And I think currently the response to that is yes. And while I'm aware that Young has responded, but sometimes not everybody reads the chat, so it's important also to give the verbal response so participants can hear. So Young, since you have given the response, and then perhaps Young, sorry, Nisa, you can come in and compliment. But Young, could you please explain, first of all, if the current designated authority can nominate themselves as the institution that is going to be the new designated authority. But more importantly, can you clarify who is supposed to nominate the institution as a designated authority, and what is that process of nomination? How should it proceed in country?
Thanks, Fari. As this question is specifically related to accreditation, I wonder whether accreditation team would be better positioned to respond, or
Hi,
if they.
Yeah, Yang. So the question is not related to accreditation. The question is, with the new system of designated authorities, who should nominate? For example, if they decide that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is going to be the designated authority to the Adaptation Fund, who nominates the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? And how do they nominate that entity? And then the second part is, if the current individual who is the designated authority, say, for example, was an officer sitting under the Ministry of Environment, or was the minister sitting under the Ministry of Environment, can the Ministry of Environment nominate itself as the new institution that is the designated authority to the Adaptation Fund? So just clarification on those two aspects.
Thank you so much, Fari. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, Sylvia is here with us also. Maybe Sylvia, do you want to kick off, and then Yang, you can complement? Go ahead, Sylvia. Yeah.
Thank you, and we're very pleased to have these conversations. And my name is Silvia Mancini, and so in answer to this question, so it's in our operational procedures that the communication to the Secretary should be made in writing and signed by either a minister, an authority at cabinet level, or the ambassador of the party. So essentially, there is always the need to have a higher authority who nominates the primary contact. So that is at the highest level of the authority within the country. So this does not change with respect to the previous policies and procedures that we have had since the beginning, when it was when a focal the designated authority was one person. So the same stands, the same procedure stands. Yang, do you want to complete?
Sure. Thanks so much, Sylvia. So here the point is that we would like to ensure that this designated authority process is country coordinated. So inside. So what we wanted to prevent is a situation that one day we received a DA nomination letter, let's say appointing the DA of the country A as Minister of Environment. And then the next day that we received another letter that nominating the Ministry of Finance as the DA of the same country. So this is like why we want to highlight that, yes, of course, the DA primary focal point may send a letter to us that nominating that the same agency as a DA of the country, but we'd like to ensure that that is a country, coordinated, in-country coordinated process. So we don't receive, two nomination letters that nominating two different ministries as the DA of the country. So hope that clarifies. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Yang. And thanks, Sylvia, for clarifying who should send the nomination letter to the Adaptation Fund. I think related to that, just one other aspect, and I'm going to pass this on to NISA, if you don't mind responding. Can the same entity or institution that the ambassador or minister appoints or nominates to be the designated authority of the Adaptation Fund, can that institution also seek accreditation with the Adaptation Fund as a national implementing entity? So can the designated authority also be an accredited implementing entity, or is it allowed to seek accreditation with the fund?
Thanks, Farai. I think the answer is pretty short. Yes, entities, the designated authority itself can be a national implementing entity. They'll have to go through the same accreditation process.
Right. Thanks, NISA. I see there's a question here for a specific incident regarding national implementing accreditation in Tajikistan. I would like to suggest that we take this one offline because it's asking about the accreditation of a national implementing entity and the process of where that accreditation application is. And we can provide further clarification and details regarding that particular application. So with that, and just being cognizant of the time, I would like to move on to the next presentation, which is a presentation that I am going to give. And this is basically outlining some of the challenges and gaps that we have experienced from the Adaptation Fund for designated authorities, some of the feedback that we have got from interacting with different stakeholders. So I'll just quickly share my screen and get into that. So we have a few challenges and gaps that I just thought would be important to highlight so that we can have a conversation around those, and this feeds into the next step, which is the crowdsourcing and the poll that we are going to run. So one of the challenges from interacting with stakeholders through Adaptation Fund workshops, forums, events that have been raised, partly by accredited implementing entities, and sometimes we have also discussed with some designated authorities who have been individuals so far. One of the challenges mentioned is the change in the designated authority. Has been an issue that designated authorities have brought themselves in terms of the process to follow and how to go about that. And I think as we have touched on that in this webinar, as Sylvia, I think, highlighted who should actually nominate and send that letter to the Adaptation Fund Secretariat, indicating that there has been a change in the designated authority. And please, that letter should be signed, and it should be a wet signature. I don't believe that we accept e-signatures for that letter. So if the minister or ambassador or a cabinet member sends that letter informing us of the change or new nomination of the designated authority, it needs to be a wet signature that you can then scan or turn into PDF and then send it by email to us. Another issue that has been mentioned is the signing of the designated authority letter of endorsement. Now, this would be a letter of endorsement for endorsing a certain project that is submitted to the Adaptation Fund or nominating an entity that is going to be the national implementing entity of that country. The issue we have heard is that there have been at times delays in signing these endorsement letters, and we would like to encourage the designated authorities to really drive that in-country coordination and interaction engagement with accredited implementing entities of the fund to have a smooth signing process so that when projects are prepared and sent to the Adaptation Fund, they can come with that letter of endorsement. The Adaptation Fund will not process a project for consideration by the board if that proposal does not have the letter of endorsement by the designated authority. So it's quite critical that that letter comes with the project. Another issue has been accessibility of designated authorities. This is related to in-country coordination, communication in-country, and encouraging the designated authority office to really kind of have like an open door policy so that decisions are made timelessly, those letters of endorsement come out timelessly, and that there is smooth information flow between accredited implementing entities, between perhaps communities that wish to access the Adaptation Fund resources, in their interaction with the Office of the Designated Authority. So we'd like to encourage that ease of access and continued accessibility. And of course, the last one has been the nomination by the designated authority of a national implementing entity that is going to seek accreditation or navigate the accreditation process of the adaptation fund. And you will notice that we keep referring to national implementing entities more than the other accredited implementing entities. And the reason is that the adaptation fund niche, the adaptation fund expertise is basically direct access. And we pride ourselves in having championed and initiated the direct access modality amongst all the other climate funds that are under the UNFCCC. And as you may understand, direct access is the modality where the fund transfers finance directly in country to the recipient institution instead of going through third parties like your multilateral development banks or UN agencies. So direct access is where we do the direct transfer from donor straight to recipient. So direct access uses national implementing entities as the vehicles to facilitate that flow of finance directly in country. And that's why we keep mentioning national implementing entities. We proactively encourage countries that engage with the adaptation fund to nominate entities and have accredited national implementing entities as the vehicles that will channel financing through direct access with the fund. Most of our funding windows favor national implementing entities, favor direct access, and these days we talk about enhanced direct access and locally led adaptation. So these are things that we proactively encourage, and we would encourage you to nominate and have accredited national implementing entities, but of course you are free to use regional implementing entities as other vehicles and multilateral implementing entities as well, depending on country context. Are there any questions so far before we get into the poll? And yes, Sylvia, you have the floor.
No, there is a question.
Oh, there is a question? Okay. I'm not seeing the question on my end. Would maybe perhaps Ishani or Jinyang, do you want to read out the question in the chat before we get into the next segment?
There are no
Yeah.
further questions in the chat at this point, Farai. All the other questions have been answered verbally or through the chat, and I don't see any hand raised either.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. So with that, perhaps one of the things we want to do during this webinar and session is to get a feel of how you see the role and function of a designated authority, what kind of needs you think you have, and if there are any kind of capacity challenges, what kind of capacity support you might want from the Adaptation Fund in terms of facilitating and empowering your role as designated authority. Ishani, Jinyang, do you mind running the poll? And we can have participants respond. There's just a few questions. We have about just 4 or 5 questions for you to quickly just answer yes or no so that we get a feel and we can have a general discussion about those. If you want, could you please scan the code that is showing on the screen? I'll stop sharing my presentation. You can scan the barcode that's displaying, and
Slido is added, and then I'm trying to pulling it up. Give me a moment.
okay.
So
And
Farai,
do you mind
there
sharing
is
your screen as well? Right, we can see your screen, Jinyang.
So I believe for all the participants, they are able to see the poll already online on the webinar, and there is no code. We will be able to see their answers as soon as they're submitted.
Okay, so the first question is, which of the following areas presents the most significant capacity gap for your institution in its capacity as designated authority? promoting access and implementation of adaptation fund projects in the country. So as an institution, which of the following areas presents the most significant capacity gaps? And we have options there. If you can select one or multiple, we'll give you just a couple of seconds to put in your votes. We see project proposal development, including climate rationale, seems to be the most popular. It's getting the most votes, followed by monitoring and evaluation. Thank you for your responses. Moving on to the next question. What are the primary challenges your country faces in implementing effective climate change adaptation projects funded by the Adaptation Fund? So as a country, beyond the institution, beyond the designated authority as an entity, what are the challenges your country faces in implementing effective climate change adaptation projects? And there are also options. You can pick among the different options that are there. And we can see your responses. I see that we have bureaucratic hurdles coming up, insufficient technical expertise is another issue that's getting a lot of votes, and difficulties in ensuring long-term sustainability of adaptation measures is also coming up with a lot of votes. Just being cognizant of the time, thank you very much for your responses. If we can move on to the next question. What types of support or capacity building would be most beneficial to your institution to enhance its role as designated authority to the Adaptation Fund? So this question is asking, if you are going to be the designated authority as an institution, what kind of capacity building support do you think would be useful coming from the Adaptation Fund to you? And there are also options you can select. I'll give you a few seconds. We have things like training workshops. Do you think technical assistance is more important, or peer learning, access to online tools? What kind of support do you think would be beneficial to the designated authority role? I see training is getting quite some high votes, followed by regional and national workshops, quite a lot of votes there, as well as I see technical assistance. This information is very important because just as for your information, the Adaptation Fund is in the process of revising or coming up with a revised strategy for its readiness and capacity building program. And some of this information and feedback you're giving will be very instrumental and useful to inform the direction that the fund takes. So thank you for those responses. Moving on to the next question. To what extent does your institution have access to and utilize relevant climate change data, mapping, and information for adaptation planning, project development, monitoring, reporting on the outcomes of Adaptation Fund projects? So are you using any data mapping? Are you using that data and mapping, if at all? To what extent are you using data and mapping in your monitoring exercises, monitoring the portfolio of projects that are overseen by the designated authority? and reporting on those projects? Or to what extent are you using data and mapping and similar tools to inform your planning for adaptation in country? I see the votes coming in, and some are using very limited, some limited, and I see quite a few have indicated that it's significant or very significant. We're almost done with the questions. Thank you for your responses. We have just 2 more questions left. The second last question, moving on to the next question. What additional resources or tools would help your institution overcome barriers to accessing and utilizing adaptation fund financing? So we have only 3 options for this one. You know, you mentioned those capacity gaps. This question is asking for possible solutions. And I know we have limited options, but this is for us to just get a sense of the direction we can take. What additional resources or tools do you think would be useful to support your institution overcome the barriers you mentioned earlier? I see the responses coming in. I see there's a lot to do with the simplified application processes and some responses related to climate data. Thank you for your votes and your responses. So we have to work on the simplified application processes and perhaps sharing more information. We do have quite a lot of guidance documents and manuals that explain how the Adaptation Fund works, how to access project financing, and what that tells me is we should be doing a lot more communication and outreach, particularly to designated authorities and our accredited implementing entities. The last question, if we can move to the last question, please. This is open-ended. Just maybe in a short phrase or in a word, what are the most pressing needs your institution has in terms of strengthening its ability to access and effectively utilize Adaptation Fund resources? You can put in a word, you can put in a short phrase, just so we understand what is the most important to you. So what are the most pressing needs your institution has in terms of strengthening its ability to access Adaptation Fund resources? The most pressing needs. In a single word, in a phrase, please type it in, and we'll be able to see it from our end. And we'll take note. And I'm aware that, by the way, we are at time. If you will indulge us, we'll just spend 1 or 2 more minutes, and then we will close. You can type in a word or a phrase. I see there are some coming in. I can see about accreditation, technical assistance, a word or a phrase. Thank you very much for your responses. If you're typing, keep typing. I'll just give you a few more seconds. I see the issues to do with communication with the DAs, streamlining process for greater efficiency, and the need to facilitate perhaps technical experts or technical expertise to work with the designated authorities and in country. Thank you for that. Okay, so we will end here. And thank you very much for joining this webinar and for your responses and providing input. From the Adaptation Fund side, this is just the start, it's not the end. We will continue this engagement with all of you via email and offline. And as I mentioned, we will post a report of this webinar online on our website, as well as we will share the recording link to this webinar so you can play it back if you want to recap on some of the issues that we discussed. But I do also encourage you to reach out to the Adaptation Fund Board Secretariat. We have an open door policy, so please, you can email us anytime and we'll be very happy to respond and engage with you further on this matter. We are very much looking forward to interacting and engaging with all the new designated authority institutions. And we currently have over 100, I think it's 100 and something designated authorities individuals. We are looking to have the same number, if not more, as designated institutions. So thank you very much to all the speakers and all the Adaptation Fund Secretariat staff who have contributed to this webinar and provided input and helping answering the questions. Thank you to the interpreters and particularly to Jin Yang, Sophie and Ishani for their work on the back end. And of course, thanks to all of you participants for being part of this webinar and taking time to interact and engage with us. So with that, we've come to the end of the webinar. We look forward to continued engagement and thank you very much. Have a good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Au revoir, and thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.